Welcome to CTO Think, a podcast about leadership, product development, and tech decisions between two recovering chief technology officers. Here are your hosts, Don Vandemark and Randy Burgess.
Hey, Randy, how you doing this week?
I'm doing well. Continuing to work in multiple things that don't allow me to focus on any one of them. But working on a Drupal 7 site that's actually going well. Working on our app, the Chasms Firebase / TypeScript / Vue JS app, and then a Rails app that I've been maintaining, supporting, and enhancing over the last 2 years. So and then working on a number of different possible contracts with other clients and stuff like that. So as usual, the brain feels spread thin on focus, but it's been getting stuff done. What's going on with you?
Just had an interesting conversation with one of our clients on our metrics this is for construction specialties. So I'm going to take that conversation and morph it to be more about CTO and tech IT metrics. But in general, metrics are the things that you measure your company by, or that clients measure your company by, or you measure your teams by. Yeah. Having been at IBM with, big enterprise contracts and things like that, I've got a good amount of experience with those kind of metrics. The more you move down to the smaller companies, the more those metrics change, and what you're looking for is slightly different. Have you come across metrics that you've had to deal with?
No, mainly because I avoid working for firms where the metrics. I mean, the first thing that jumps in my brain when you talk about this stuff is lacks context. Doomed to sink you. Like in the sense that metrics and numbers without context will they're either manipulated to paint a better picture than exists, or it doesn't show why numbers are the realistic numbers, why they aren't as high as people want them. So I don't mind answering to goals and quality directives and markers for success like that. You need something for management to know if in the black box of technology and product that we don't understand, how do we measure how well we're doing? Sure. But just enterprise level numbers and dashboards and grades just don't tell the full story. And I always feel like instead of building quality products that meet the end user goal, you're really focused on pushing up certain specific numbers. So that's what I initially think. But tell me if I'm on the wrong path with that thing.
No, you're completely on the right path. That as concrete and as objective as measurements and numbers feel, they are just another part of a story that you're telling. Yeah. And if you make your metrics, then you just throw the metrics out there. You say, we made it. You're done. If you don't make your metrics, then usually you've got a story around why you didn't and what inhibited you from doing it. And then in most cases, it didn't matter anyway. Let's talk real quick about the most common or the most well-known IT metric, and that's availability. And that's where you hear things like 5 nines and 6 nines and things like that. So that is the 5 nines and 6 nines refers to 99.999% availability or 99.9999% availability.
Yeah.
And what's really important to understand when it comes to that metric, for those who haven't come across it, is you're going to hear people say 5 nines, 6 nines, 7 nines, things like that, because they're like, we're super available. When it comes to amount of downtime per year, 5 nines means you were down for 5.5 minutes the whole year.
Yeah.
6 nines means you were down half a minute the whole year. So while that's really, really big sounding and really important sounding, it's also, unless depending on the importance of your app, it's also irrelevant.
Yeah.
You don't need to be available all but 30 seconds of the year for most of the services we offer. I would argue you could even go down to the 4 nines, which is just under an hour, over a whole year, right? And
yeah.
for Aspire EDU, we actually have a really good availability number as far as what we affect. But we are so intertwined with other things that any kind of metric percentage that we tried to meet, if we failed it, we'd have a story to tell. Mm-hmm. And then what good is that metric? We'd be able to say, AWS was down for 4 minutes the other day. So if AWS is down, we're down. The Canvas learning management system that we use for most of our clients, that our clients use in order to log into our system, they were down for 3 minutes. We weren't down, but they were down. You couldn't get to our service.
Can you get away with, the term that I've started to hear more and more when people go down is, we are suffering an outage due to an upstream provider. So
that's usually what goes on our status page. Yes.
So can you get away with saying our uptime is 9 point? We have a upstream provider uptime and we have our own uptime. Can you get away with that?
I think you could, but again, you're now telling a story. You're no longer working with hard, fast numbers that were in the contract.
The context, right? I want to keep. Yeah, exactly.
Right. You're telling a story.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what happens with metrics. I just had a 45-minute conversation with the client. Okay. And it was a very pleasant conversation. It was very much, it's not anything that we've contractually committed to. It was, here's a report card of how you're doing within the work. And so we talked about some of the areas we're struggling. And we talked about how a lot of the reason we're struggling is on their side. They could be doing things differently to help us make those numbers better. Mm-hmm. So that's really where I think numbers are important. And we can talk about some of the other numbers when it comes to IT. I think numbers are important as a snapshot, as something to take a stake in the ground and say, okay, here's where we were at this period of time. Here's where we are 3 months from now. Let's see what's changed. Let's see if we can figure out what changed all those things. Not to be contractually obligated for all of those different items, but more to understand our business better. And that's where metrics can help. They can help to understand. If you go into your viewing of the metrics as what's the story around them, all of a sudden you understand your business a little better. So you're no longer making excuses. You're now trying to figure out why things changed.
Yeah.
And that's where metrics are great. And I will say that's also where they're a rabbit hole, because I literally could spend all my time doing nothing but metrics for the company, and making stories, and I'm not sure it would help. So you gotta pick the wheat through the chaff. But that's really one of those things that helps.
Have you ever worked with someone that subscribed to the numbers dogmatically and like, I guess my experience has been spending a lot of time building a system to build the reporting necessary for the scorecard, for the numbers. And then you learn after the first week of delivery, nobody really cares.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of context. Because they know that there's like, oh, well, that particular user's numbers are down because of XYZ, which we can't reflect in here. This is worthless. So it's not just me feeling like, hey, I'm going to deliver numbers that lack context and make me look bad. It's also, at the end of the day, I know who I'm delivering this to will see through these numbers and not care after all the work getting them.
Well, your client's going to have their own story to tell about the numbers. That you've got a story to tell, they've got a story to tell, and they're usually two different stories. So it's contractual metrics are usually a problem because they inhibit conversation. Because you all of a sudden are focused on the numbers and one side is making excuses and the other side sees the other side making excuses.
Yeah.
So what I want to head down the road of next is I've talked about availability, which is more of an enterprise-y KPI. And we try to keep the conversation here more about startups and things like that. So Google Analytics is a measure of metrics, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at Google Analytics, what do you pull out of that as far as your website? What's important to you?
For me, I usually just look at how many visitors I've had over the last few months. Like, is it going up or down? I don't really use the web. I've never got a random client from my website. So I don't really, honestly, the website's there to validate, oh, this is a real person with a real company. And that's how people validate you. Like if I gave people an email address, and I'm guilty of this too, if someone sends me an email for their business and I go and take the domain name of their email and then go and they don't have a website, I'm like, that's shady. Yeah. So I have a website that I didn't ever finish the whole thing in terms of the design that just says, yeah, I exist. So, excuse me. So I only look to see like, hey, are the numbers still hitting the same average so that I know the website's up? And I only look at it very randomly. But I do have a client that uses analytics to see conversions through a path on their site. So I look at her metrics to study is the pipeline she has, the funnel she has for sales working. Right. Of course, the analytics don't work because of a third party provider doesn't show the links right or the analytic code right. But that's how she was using it. So I think that's what a lot of people doing e-commerce sales are doing is, are my funnels effective?
Sure. And I've been listening a lot to a couple of different podcasts. So I'm gonna recommend to the listener they go listen to other podcasts.
Yeah.
But Bootstrapped Web is one I've been listening to. Yeah. Startups for the Rest of Us is another. And Build Your SaaS with the which is around the building of Transistor, which is the podcast platform we use to host our podcast. Yeah. Those three I listen to regularly, and they regularly have conversations on KPIs. What are they looking at as far as how's their business doing?
MMR. That's their number.
MMR. Right? Yep. MMR, which monthly something revenue. It's
monthly made up
yeah,
revenue.
MRR, monthly recurring revenue. That's why I couldn't come up with it.
Monthly made up revenue to make us sound more important than we are. Yeah, monthly recurring revenue.
Monthly recurring revenue. So there's also ARR, which is annual recurring revenue, which if you're on an annual contract basis, is more relevant. But you can take your ARR, divide it by 12, and you essentially have your MRR.
Yeah,
that's one. There are others, and one that one of them has been talking about. And it's the founder of CartHook, which is something that hooks into Shopify. They've been talking about churn a lot. And that is they bring clients on, but then they lose them within 30, 60, 90 days. And that's also something to keep an eye on, because that's a lot of customer acquisition costs and not a lot of customer onboarding cost, and then not a lot of revenue out of it.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things they look at. I'm sure everybody listening is probably fairly familiar with burn rate and runway, which is just essentially you have so much money, and you're burning X amount per month, and you divide the amount of money you have by your burn, and that's your runway. That's how much time you have to finish before you run out of money. That's usually only in the VC world or the funded world. So anybody bootstrapping doesn't necessarily look at that as much, because they're usually working off the revenues of what they have.
Yeah.
Another one, especially if for some reason you're doing a free app instead of a paid app, just monthly active users. So that's just what's your usage rate on a monthly basis.
Yeah. So for yourself personally, if you were to say, excuse me, if you were to snap your fingers and have a report daily for both Aspire EDU and Construction Specialties, with just a few metrics, what would you choose for either one?
Yeah, they're different businesses, so they require different things. At Aspire EDU, which is a SaaS business, one thing I like to know churn. Now our churn isn't 30, 60, 90 days. Our churn is the client signed an annual contract. Did they re-up?
Yeah.
And again, we're telling stories when we find out that they're not re-upping, because if our churn's not bad, but anytime we lose somebody, it's usually because the state's no longer funding the grant that paid for our service, or there's been a departmental cutback in budget. It very rarely is it they're not happy with the service. So again, we're telling ourselves that story. So are we getting the value out of the metric when we've already told ourselves a story?
Yeah.
Because we're not willing to dig in on the metric a little more. For construction specialties, I look at a couple things. I look at monthly profit margin, just making sure we're making money. I look at our accounts receivable versus our accounts payable, and the gap between them. We always have a significant gap, a positive gap, which is a good thing, because that's essentially money in the bank, because these aren't clients that will not pay.
Yeah.
So we know it's money coming. But is that growing? Is that shrinking? Because that could be an indicator of a slowdown of business if it's shrinking.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden the money's going out faster than it's coming in. And then just total number of tickets on for what the work we do. But mainly it's profit margin and that difference. And I actually tried to Google for what is the difference between AR and AP called, and I couldn't find it. So I don't know. There has to be a term for it, but I don't know what
the number. When you talk about the financials, like accounts receivable, that tells you after the fact health.
Yep.
So you just said number of tickets. Like, what are the indicators that you're paying attention to that kind of give you this is the state of things at the moment?
That remains to be built. But if I were to snap my fingers and build something, I'd want to see number of open tickets per client on a rolling basis, number of inbound tickets on a rolling basis, meaning last week, over the past 6 weeks, we're averaging 35 tickets a week. The previous 6 weeks, it was 45.
Yeah.
What happened? Why are we getting less work? And figure out if that's just nature of the beast, which sometimes it is. Sometimes a calendar thing. November and December are usually historically slow months. Or is it possible that our clients are using somebody else, and therefore the amount of tickets we're using is getting less? The amount of tickets we're seeing is getting less. So if I could snap my fingers, that would be one I'd want to see on a regular basis. Ticket size would be the other. Mm-hmm. How much are these tickets worth to us? Those would help gauge the health of the business, I think. And it's funny for me not to say completion time, response time, all the things that the clients are focused on, because that's what they're focused on. I'm less focused on that.
Yeah.
Because I know that that's more stuff we have to do. That doesn't tell me anything about the health of the business.
Mm-hmm. Here's a funny sidebar. Every time I say snap your fingers, I now have this picture of Thanos with the glove right next to Thor's head. And it's ruined the idea of like, oh, just snap your fingers and get stuff done, because really it means destruction of half of the living things in the universe. So maybe I'll use a different, if you could just wave a magic wand, which maybe Harry Potter's tainted that one too. Yeah. But what I've always been curious about, because I've never going into metrics related to an app running, like let's go into technical stuff.
Yeah.
Do you pay attention to what's the big like data engine on Heroku? It's the expensive one with so many numbers that I never could figure out. What do I care about here? I can't remember the reporting system. There's one called Scout, which is a dumbed down one. But what's the?
Well, we've got a number of things.
New Relic,
Sentry, New Relic. Okay, that's the one. Sure.
So, do you what kind of metrics are you looking for app health? I would say, or do you care, or does it? Is it?
For app health. Again, it depends on what your app is doing, but you want to look at your query times. So, what are your long running queries? That's one that tends to bite us more often than not. Is finding those long running queries and doing something about them. Response time is another one that pops up. We've gotten away from using New Relic. And more towards just looking at overnight. We run a data retrievals, so we make sure those finish on time, and those are important to us. But I think for the generic SaaS, you're going to be looking at things like response time, failed requests, 404 errors, 500 errors, things like that. Things where people are hitting errors in your application. You want to see the error rate. You want to see what they're hitting and if it's a trend. Because sometimes they may just be typing your URL name and then / gobbledygook and not getting anything. And that's not something you particularly care about unless gobbledygook shows up 300
Well, half the
times,
time
you want to know why.
Half the time it's /WP-admin for people trying to fish and find out if you have a vulnerability on your site.
Yeah, and that would be one to look out for. But if you've already got it protected, if you're not using it, then that's not actionable. It's just something.
There's a lot of noise is the biggest issue, I think.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of noise in logs. We do a lot of our work through logs. I wonder how it would probably seem funny to the developers who did it, but it probably would have so little impact. But if you were to actually have a page at /WP-admin that said, haha, we're not here. The fact is a robot's probably hitting it. So it doesn't do you any good. It's not going to accomplish anything. But yeah, we spend a lot of time in logs, and we've recently just gone through a process of trying to figure out who the best log SaaS is. Papertrail's one, logs.io is another, Loggly's another. Sentry kind of does that. And the reason we spend a lot of time in logs is we're looking for those specific errors. And we'd like to be able to pull numbers together on what's going on in the logs. And Papertrail can do that to some degree, but we found that the charts and the metrics you can get out of some of the others are better than what you can get out of Papertrail. That said, I think we're sticking with Papertrail because I told my developers to run the two side by side, and they're running into issues trying to solve problems with the new one. So Papertrail's giving them better visibility into stuff, just not better summary level information.
Yeah, I mean, Papertrail for me has just been tried and true. That's the best word I can use for it. I don't need a lot of fancy stuff, but I need alert. I want to get alerts sent to my email when I get errors, and I want to be able to go in and do searches if I need it.
And I find the searching of it to be limited. There have been times I've been trying to search for something, and just the way they've got it set up, it's hard to get there. I can get a bigger result set than what I want, and then I pare it down from there. But it's hard to get the exact result set I want, and that's kind of why we were looking elsewhere. So we'll keep looking, and if there's an interesting story to tell there, we'll tell that.
So because you're the head honcho at Construction Specialties, you have your own metrics that you look at, but you kind of answer to another party on Aspire. What are the folks? What are the other executives looking at number wise that you're aware of at Aspire?
From an IT standpoint, not a lot. If ever there was anything that entered into a contract, we'd be on top of that. But really, for Aspire, we're dealing with onesie twosie errors. It's a lot of singular error finding, and then finding trends within those errors. We don't have a lot of numbers we report within Aspire EDU as far as IT metrics, mainly because all the main normal numbers are fine. Availability, we're always up. We don't go down unless a upstream provider goes down. We just don't. The system runs. The only time it goes down is if we ever have to do like a database migration. And then we're doing that at 11 o'clock at night. So if nobody's on the system and the system is down, was the system truly down? If the tree falls in the forest.
Yeah, like how do the 5 nines work when it's really like 5 nines during business hours, right?
Yeah, but usually not. Usually not. If you've got something in your contract for 5 nines, it means 365 by 365 and a quarter by 24 by 7. It's the whole
Well, I know,
time,
but
which is
that's
silly
silly,
because that doesn't, that again. So what are you doing? You're telling stories. And that's we've gone to the Canvas conference every year for the past, I don't know how many years, as long as we've been in business. And one of the things they always show is their uptime.
Yeah.
Which is important, and for them it is. For them it's important. And the thing is, guess what? They showed their chart, and every spike they had a story, and the story was AWS was down. So so that's where metrics always lead to numbers. I'm sorry, metrics always lead to stories. So metrics always come from numbers and always lead to stories. So I've got a cat that just entered the room. So
I heard it, and it basically said none of this matters. That's what I heard. The meow.
Yeah, the cat is saying I hate metrics. So
an interesting. So you'd mentioned Transistor, and they dealt with their first bout of downtime during regular business hours. It actually caused our podcast, This Old App, to go down because they had a deal. It was related to a HTTPS certificate issue. And then because we were using Cloudflare, their adjustments in Cloudflare's response had an issue. And it took a while to, just due to different circumstances, we were down all day on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And they very much, to their point, it wasn't a big, like, most people don't launch their podcast on weekends. We don't. We do on Tuesday mornings. Most podcasts are not listened to, downloaded on Sundays. And that's probably like across the board, unless you're related to church or faith or something.
Right.
And so for us, it wasn't like that. The lack of the 5 nines for that day was frustrating to me. Just, I wanted up there, but it wasn't ultimately something to fret that much about. And so if I were to look at their record and they say, well, we had a bout of downtime because of SSL certificate issues on a Sunday, I really wouldn't hold that against them. I would hold it more against them if they didn't record it and then said, we're up 5 nines. Like, don't lie about it.
Right.
But, I think every SaaS platform has to answer to that stuff. But again, it's always like, here are our numbers, but. And then that's what really matters. And so it's amazing to me over the years, the number of projects related to executive dashboards still prevail in the wild. And it's like I don't know, like, it's important for executives to get numbers. They have to know how the business is doing.
Yeah.
But the efforts taken to provide those numbers upstream in a particular format and fancy charts, I don't know how much money's been wasted in that manner. And I don't know what the balance is, because I don't think that you should run a business without metrics and reporting. It's just, what's the best way? So going back, I don't know, we're a couple of weeks removed from you talking about the fact that you are building reports for Aspire.
Yeah.
How have you made any progress on the direction you're taking?
No, mainly because I had to focus on more immediate things within the business, and I didn't want to take the time away from that. But I still need answers to those questions. Now, is it worth company money to pay out to get that information? I don't know. That's when you're skating on the razor thin edge of profit, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things I continue to struggle with. But I do think, the main point to take out of what we're saying is not metrics are bad. I think you summarized it best just now, is that the stories are better. Use the metrics to find the stories to tell. Because if you can tell a story about your company and where it is and what it's doing, that's a heck of a lot more interesting and a heck of a lot more actionable than just some numbers somewhere. The numbers might help inform the stories, but that's as far as it should go.
And the other side of it is, I mean, I deal with this a lot because my hobby is fantasy baseball, and stats are huge in baseball now. Ever since Moneyball, ever since baseball teams, like I think Boston won the World Series based on a stat-driven strategy, baseball has become just every pitch has a story around it. And the hardest thing about this part of the year is a very small sample size for the season.
Yeah.
So you've got a pitcher that is doing horribly and they're an ace. And so people are like, is this the end of this person's dominance? And the pundits are like, we're only 2 weeks into the season, chill out. But then they start, well, let's go back half a year to the last 3 months of last season. But there's a gap between that. So the stories around these sample sizes is relative. Like, how much data are you looking at to paint a picture of right now? And the bottom line is that machines look at truth unless they're manipulated by someone producing the numbers. And humans manipulate based on gut feel, which is often wrong, like opinion, and how the numbers need to look for other people. So there's manipulation on presentation. Like, of course, what is the quote? There's lies, damn lies, in statistics. I mean, like, when you're running a business, MRR is looked at by the indie development community because it is almost pure truth. Money that you got in your bank account this month.
Right.
All other issues to the side. Is that number coming in, and is it reflecting a healthy business growth or decline? It's not looking at expenses per month, which, Transistor, I'm bringing them up just because I listened to their podcast as well. And they mentioned that they hit their goal, I think, of 10 grand a month.
Yeah.
And that's a big step in a SaaS product's life, is moving up those ladders and hitting that number. But the 4 or 5 episodes before that, they were talking about how much does it cost to host podcast audio.
Right.
And those numbers were like, whoa, that's a lot more than I thought. Like, when you talked about scale, like the number of downloads they're serving.
Sure.
So that MRR is like, oh yeah, nice goal. How much are you spending per month on the hosting at the price plans that you have? That's like a whole other picture. And so that MRR suddenly is like, that's the less important if your expenses are growing out of whack too.
Right.
And I think
what are you doing? You're telling yourself the story. So the numbers are important to inform the story, which makes it actionable.
Yeah. So the other number we're at is about 40 minutes. and that's typically what we like to aim for our podcast. But I think this is a good conversation. Just maybe if you're out there as a listener and you've always thought that a lot of these metrics you're chasing for your employer or peers or the market feel like they're not totally helpful, you're not alone. I mean, I feel like everybody kind of talks about reporting and numbers and metrics in this way. And most people,
I would go one step further. If somebody out there has a metric they love, tweet it at us or send it to our email.
Yeah.
And we'll be glad to break it down and tell you why it's crap.
Yeah, well, that even goes into a complete different sidebar of we've started to get a few more listeners interacting with us, sometimes on LinkedIn, sometimes on Twitter, and we do have a listener base that we kind of here's a number that I'm like, whoa, what happened here? We actually have people subscribing to our newsletter list. Not that we've ever posted a newsletter. Sure. But I used to think that we would get notices when we get subscribers, and we haven't. So now we have like 40 to 50 people signed up for a newsletter we don't send out. And I had no idea until I looked at the metrics on Transistor. So yeah, like I'm kind of curious if you're a listener and you have an opinion about metrics, or you have a number that you think is complete crap, or a number that you really like to live and die on, tweet it to us and we will talk about it. And also if there's other subject matter you'd like us to discuss, that's cool too, because we're always kind of guessing about what should we talk about this week. And if there's subject matter that we can bring up, we definitely would be interested in talking more about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, then Randy might just start talking about his cats. So,
oh man, one of our kittens has totally fallen in love with me and just is now hanging around and showing more attention. So I can talk about that all day. I really like that.
See, listener, this is what we have to put up with if you don't help us.
Could there be a podcast where we just talk while our cats, like your cat, sits there complaining about, the podcast itself, or my cat just purrs into the mic? I mean, would that be of value to anyone?
No. We've already done half this podcast with me fighting this cat to keep her quiet. So,
all right, cool. Well, good talk, and we will talk next week.
All right, sounds good.
Later.
Thanks for listening to the CTO Think podcast. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at ctothink.com. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. Patreon contributions help us to produce episode transcripts, which allow people that are deaf or hard of hearing to access the show. If you have feedback, ideas, or want to be a guest, please email us at hello@ctothink.com. Show music is Dumpster Dive by Mark Wallach, licensed by PremiumBeat.com. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us next week.